Good morning. I want to talk specifically today about the month of October for America and Donald Trump. And I'm titling this presentation October 2025, a month of wounding for America and Trump. So let's see if I can share my screen and we can get started. This will take just a few seconds. I have to get rid of some panels so that I can see what I'm doing. And we're almost there. And here we are, October 25th, a month of wounding for America and Trump. And first we'll look at the USA. I tend to use a July 2nd, 1776 chart for America because that is when the Declaration of Independence was passed by the Continental Congress. If you use a July 4th, 1776 chart, such as the Sibley chart, things will be pretty much the same, except for the position of the moon. In a couple of days, from July 2nd to July 4th, the moon moves on about 30 degrees. So the aspects that I'm focusing on to the moon, they're not going to apply so much to that July 4th chart. But as I say, July 2nd is when the Declaration of Independence was actually passed. Okay, let's get started. And I'm actually starting with transits on September 30th, 2025. And this gives us a pretty good preview of the month ahead. The main aspect I'm looking at is transiting Chiron, square both Mercury and Moon. And when Chiron applies to the masses, we usually get the wounding aspect rather than the healing or transcendent aspect of Chiron. Mercury can have to do with trade and commerce, the moon with health, and with how the public is feeling. And consequently, for quite some time, I've been anticipating that October might be a month of wounding for America, economically and in terms of healthcare. And since Mercury also has to do with speech, we can expect a wounding of freedom of speech. And all of those things are what is happening right now. With Trump's tariffs on other countries, that can bring about a lot of wounding to Americans, economically, that is, inflation rising, goods not becoming available. Mercury rules Gemini, which is on the cusp of the ninth house in this chart. So again, this can also be wounding to other countries through commerce and tariffs and things like that. And to add to all of this, to add to the crackdown by Trump on freedom of speech, we also have that the government has just shut down. And I would not be surprised if that lasts for a while, at least perhaps half the month. Though people can make good decisions, which can mitigate the pain and resolve the crisis sooner rather than later, or they cannot make those good decisions and the crisis could linger on beyond perhaps what I am anticipating. Now, we also, on September 30th, transiting Mercury was exactly opposite natal Chiron. In this case, this acts as a trigger. Mercury moves pretty fast. Its aspects don't last all that long. So usually I don't get too worried about them. But in this situation, it is the straw that breaks the camel's back. It has acted as a trigger. We have gone into wounding and the government has shut down. And there's talk also about healthcare. That is one of the main issues and one of the main reasons why the Democrats did not go along with the Republicans to pass a continuing resolution for spending. They're very concerned about the $1 trillion cut from healthcare, which is being given to corporations and the 1% in terms of very generous tax cuts, according to Trump's plan and his desires. And there's been a lot of talk about how healthcare premiums for the coming year are going to jump for millions of people and perhaps all of us. We'll just have to wait and see about that. But because of all of this T-square being formed by natal Mercury, natal Moon, and transiting Chiron, I have been anticipating for quite some time that this could be a month of wounding. Now, we also have transiting Neptune, square Venus, that has been rather ongoing for America this year. Neptune can represent these new policy changes. It can represent misinformation, confusion, also fanaticism and zeal about certain issues. Venus, in this instance, it has to do with what people like, what they don't like, their values. It refers to their nonverbal right brain. And with Venus in Cancer, it's all about how people are feeling, their gut reaction to things. And with Neptune making a square to Venus, people are not feeling so great. There's a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of worry and concern about the future as a result of new policies going into place. So the month coming up does not look all that pleasant. Now, transiting Saturn, however, is making a sextile to natal Pluto, and Pluto in this USA chart often represents the power of the president. In general, it represents the power of the nation, but the nation is run by the president, and so this often has to do with his power. Both the Sun and Pluto can be indicators for Donald Trump in this case. And so it is quite likely that whatever Trump does, he will have a fairly easy time of implementing whatever orders, regulations, or new structures that he puts into place. The sextile doesn't mean that what happens is going to be necessarily good, simply that it is going to be easy when it comes to the functions of these two particular planets. Transformation and power for Pluto, control and regulation for Saturn. And then we have transiting Pluto, making a quincunx to natal Venus. The quincunx is an aspect of adjustment. When two planets are quincunx, or rather I should say when we have two signs that are 150 degrees apart, those two signs don't have much in common. They have different elements and different modes. And so adjustments have to be made for those two signs to work together. In this case, Pluto represents a lot of power. And in context, I would say the power of the government and the president. And once again, with Venus in Cancer, people are going to have to make adjustments to what the powers that be are forcing upon them. So, maybe not the best month for America. Now, This is not the first time this year that transiting Neptune has been square natal Venus. It was square natal Venus earlier, exactly on April 9th, 2025. And here are some of the headlines from that day. Trump's tariff surge hits auto industry. President Trump's latest round of tariffs, some exceeding 104% on Chinese imports, went into effect just after midnight. Several car makers responded by closing factories, laying off workers, or shifting production overseas. Again, fear and uncertainty as a result of these policies. Also, middle-class dining in decline. A cultural piece explored the disappearance of affordable restaurants, asking, where will we eat when the middle-class restaurant is gone? Now, Uranus has been very prominent in everything that Trump has been doing this year, and so we have seen a lot of reversals of policy, a lot of flip-flops, back and forth with these tariffs. And when Trump eases off on the tariffs or postpones the tariffs, then that mitigates, lessens some of the damage caused by them. But it also creates greater uncertainty and greater anxiety as a result. So that has been the case with Trump's tariffs on China and some other countries. And so things have not gotten quite as bad as they would have gotten if Trump imposed these large tariffs and never flip-flopped on them. Okay, if we look at the full moon on October 6, 2025, and how that affects America, we still have transiting Neptune, square Venus, we still have transiting Chiron, square natal Mercury and Moon. This is on October 6th. But what is interesting is the transiting Sun and Moon are conjunct or opposite natal Saturn. So over here you can see transiting Sun at 14 degrees Libra, conjunct America's Saturn at 14 degrees Libra, and the Moon at 14 degrees Aries is opposite natal Saturn at 14 degrees Aries. So this is also acting as a trigger, and since it's a full moon, everything we see here will be intensified, and that suggests that around this time in October, we will begin to experience the consequences of our action as a nation. We will get some of our karmic return at this particular time. And I should point out that Trump's Chiron is at 14 degrees of Libra. Consequently, no one has wounded the structures of American government and democracy in my lifetime nearly as much as Donald Trump has. And in Donald Trump's progressed horoscope for this year, progressed Mars is at 14 degrees Libra, exactly conjunct his natal Chiron at 14 degrees Libra, and exactly conjunct the USA Saturn at 14 degrees Libra. Consequently, Trump's tendency to wound these structures in America have been taking place on steroids. He has been putting tremendous amount of energy into dismantling government structures and also wounding our democracy in the process. Now, on the good side for America, transiting Mars is trine the natal Sun at this full moon. That could benefit the country, but it may benefit the presidency, Donald Trump, more than it does people. Either way, Trump will have probably an easy time enacting certain policies, and with transiting Saturn making a sextile to natal Pluto, that will also have a tendency to make it easy for Trump to wield his power and control others and put certain policies and actions into place. Okay. Now on October 13th of 2025, looking at transits to the USA chart, transiting Jupiter is going to make a semi-square to natal Uranus, and that is going to be exact. Transiting Jupiter tends to expand things. Uranus breaks up the existing pattern. It's positively connected with innovation, creativity, invention, things that are very good. And we may see an expansion of American ingenuity at this point in time, a burst of invention and ingenuity within America. However, in the USA chart, Uranus in Gemini is also associated with war and conflict. This is where Uranus was during the American Revolution. We had a Uranus return in the 1860s during the American Civil War. Uranus went into Gemini during the buildup to that Civil War. And when Uranus entered Gemini, in I believe 1941, a few months later, we became involved in World War II. And when the Uranus return occurred in the 1940s, we were involved in the Manhattan Project to produce an atomic bomb from enriched uranium. So Uranus, uranium, there seems to be a connection there. And not only was that a return to aggression of sorts, but this was also a tremendous display of American science and ingenuity and inventiveness. Back in the 1940s, no one had produced an atomic bomb before. It existed only in theory until the Manhattan Project suddenly was successful. So we could get an expansion of aggression, the militaristic activities at this point of the month, in addition to getting some sort of expansion of creativity and inventiveness. Now, along with everything else, we still have transiting Chiron, square the Moon and Mercury, probably continuing to wound America's economy and healthcare and the people. We have transiting Sun in a pretty strong opposition to natal Chiron on this day. That can act as a trigger. And previously, it was Sun conjunct Saturn that was acting as a trigger. Now it's Sun in opposition to Chiron acting as a trigger. We have a fairly significant opposition between Saturn and Chiron. And the natal chart for America, at its best, Chiron in Aries represents the recognition of the spiritual worth and dignity of every individual in America. And we enshrine that in our foundational writings. We make that part of the very structure of America. That is Chiron at its best, leading to something transcendent, which goes beyond the visible world. But America also exhibits this opposition at its worst, where we engage in wounding individuals both within our country and without, and we try and control other nations as well as the people within our country. So, for the first half of this month, at the very least, this Saturn-Chiron opposition in the USA chart is being stimulated. And the question is, what kind of nation are we going to be? Are we going to be a nation that tries to control others and its own population and to wound both other countries and our own people? Or will we rediscover our more transcendent roots and inclinations and once again become a beacon of light and a beacon of freedom and democracy for the rest of the world? That is the question. Now, transiting Jupiter at this time will also be conjunct natal Mercury and opposite natal Moon. That will probably work out a little bit more positively. So by the middle of the month, we may start to get some easing up of the wounding that we are entering into right now. It will depend also on decisions that people make. But by mid-month, we may resolve this government shutdown that we have just entered. We may resolve it then, if not before. Though, as I say, it also depends upon free will, what people decide. So people could decide the opposite, and the suffering could be extended throughout the rest of the month if that is the decision that is made. But this at least opens up a possibility for some relief, some expansion of the economy, expansion and relief for what people are feeling and experiencing right now. When we get to the new moon on October 21st of 2025, again, we still have transiting Chiron, square Mercury and the moon. We still have transiting Jupiter conjunct an opposite natal Mercury and natal moon. So that could very well be positive, but the sun and the moon are making a pretty strong square to natal Pluto. This might represent a lot of dissatisfaction with what Trump is doing and the current authoritarian nature of America, both at home and abroad. There is also going to be an interesting quincunx between transiting Mars and Mercury and natal Mars and natal Chiron. With transiting Mars conjunct Mercury, I would expect people to be very vocal. There may be some angry rhetoric. Since this is going to make a quincunx to natal Mars, that could result in angry rhetoric in America in particular, possibly violent actions too. Notice that the USA, Mars is in Gemini, and Gemini is ruled by Mercury. So this conjunction and this aspect make it resonate particularly strong with America. And then Mars and Mercury, as they transit, they're also making a strong quincunx to Chiron. This could result in more wounding for America. Remember, the quincunx is an aspect of adjustment. Americans may have to make some adjustments as a result of wounding they are feeling. But this adjustment could also be a return to the healing nature of Chiron and to the spiritual nature of Chiron. Chiron wounds, but it really wants us to go from the visible world to the invisible, transcendent spiritual realm where things are more joyous. Wounding comes about only because people's hard exterior shells often have to first be cracked before the light can enter. So there may be a cry, a shout out to the powers that be to respect people's dignity, to respect their intrinsic spiritual worth. And if that is what happens, then that would be a good thing. Now, if we look at these graphs to see the transits throughout the month, we see Chiron square Moon and Mercury. It's pretty strong throughout the month. Those aspects are exact, respectively. On October 11th and 13th, this is in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I live. It's only toward the end of the month that these squares start to fade. Transiting Neptune square Venus will be exact on October 6th. It's also strong pretty much throughout the month, but starts to fade a bit toward the end. But Jupiter conjunct Mercury and opposite the Moon, that starts to gain strength as these other aspects fade. And this is more likely to turn out to be beneficial because Jupiter is the great benefic. So I don't know exactly what will happen. Again, this is just a weather report. Astrology is like a weather report. It's analogous to looking at the weather reports for the path of a hurricane. We have certain expectations, certain things we think are higher rather than lower probabilities. But what actually happens can depend on many factors, and sometimes the path the hurricane takes is not the one that we initially expected. Nonetheless, based upon what I see here, I would expect that after we reach mid-month, mid-October, that the tide on this government shutdown may turn, and we may really begin looking for ways to get out of this shutdown. And by the end of the month, the shutdown may have ended. Now, what actually happens, and remember that free will is always a factor here. People can decide to do things sooner or they can decide to do things later. So, as a result of free will, we may end the government shutdown much earlier. We may get relief from economic pain earlier, or we could even go through the whole month and not have resolved the shutdown. But right now, what looks like the outcome that has the highest probability is that the shutdown may last through mid-October, and then people, politicians, may be looking more actively for a way out, and by the end of the month, maybe we will be out of the shutdown. That is what seems to have the highest probability, but that is not necessarily what will occur. Again, free will is a factor, so we just have to wait and see what people decide. Now, we do have some good aspects that will be in play, and much of them involve Saturn. We talked about Saturn making a sextile to Pluto. That is exact on October 2nd. This is beneficial when it comes to America's power and when it comes to Trump's power, the power of the executive branch. Again, it does not mean that power will be used wisely. It simply means that Saturn, the drive to control and regulate things, will coordinate well with this drive for power and transformation, and thus whatever America or Trump does will have a fairly easy time of it during the first half of October. Also, during the first week of October, Jupiter, transiting Jupiter, making a sextile to Neptune, will be strong, and this will probably make it easy for Trump to expand some of his policies, whether those policies are good or bad. Okay, and then toward the very end of the month, Saturn sextile Moon and Saturn trine natal Mercury, they will begin to get stronger. And this is another indication that maybe toward the end of the month, we will resolve this government shutdown or some of the other economic wounding that is going on right now. We have transiting Uranus making a semi-sextile to natal Venus. That is also an aspect of adjustment. This may have to do with new inventions, sudden inventions or discoveries that people will have to adjust to. Or it could also have to do with certain military ventures, either at home or abroad, that people have to adjust to, such as National Guard being moved into their cities and onto their streets. Whatever it is, this aspect is going to be pretty strong throughout most of October. We also have Pluto making that quincunx to Venus. It's strongest in the middle of the month, but never gets all that strong. Nonetheless, this represents adjustments people will have to make to their feelings and attitudes as a result of presidential power, most likely. And we have a few semi-squares and sesquiquadrants. These are aspects which can be turning points. Often they come and go without anything in particular happening, but sometimes they're like the straw that breaks the camel's back. And we have, let's see, Saturn, Uranus, and Chiron involved. Uranus quite a bit. So we can expect a lot of sudden changes this month, a lot of shifts in directions, a lot of breaking up of the usual patterns. And Saturn, Uranus, and Chiron involved in semi-squares or sesquiquadrats, we're going to see that in Donald Trump's chart too for this month. Saturn has to do with stability or control, regulation. Chiron most likely will manifest as wounding, could manifest as healing or transcendence. But we're most likely to see a lot of sudden things, unexpected changes in direction, attempts to control things, and wounding of things this month. Jupiter making this semi-square to Uranus, that is going to be in effect throughout most of the month. This could be either an expansion of chaos or an expansion of creativity, such as we have talked about before. Also, an expansion of the use of the military at home or abroad, since Uranus and Gemini tends to stir revolutionary thoughts and ideas. Uranus making a sesquiquadrant to Saturn. That could be sudden changes in discipline or regulations. Chiron making a semi-square to Uranus. That could be sudden wounding. This is all taking place in the latter half of the month. And this is also when some of the more beneficial aspects I talked about might take place, aspects which could indicate an end to the government shutdown. But these sesquiquadrats and semi-squares suggest that it's not all going to happen smoothly. There's still going to be friction of some sort involved. Exactly what events will occur, I can't say, but it could be related to things which happen suddenly, sudden changes in policy, and things that involve changes to regulations. So we'll just have to wait and see at the end of the month, are we going to get wounding from Chiron or will we get healing? Hopefully the latter. Now, if we look at Trump on September 30th of 2025, he has his transiting lunar nodal axis square Uranus. That has been going on for a while. It's making him very erratic and very chaotic in his governance of America. He has transiting Chiron square Venus. His natal Venus rules his 10th house of status and society, and he has been becoming much more unpopular during these periods when transiting Chiron is squaring natal Venus. His approval ratings usually go down when this happens. But at the same time, he will have transiting Chiron making a square to his natal Mars, which is conjunct his ascendant. And this is the way his chart is set up. When a planet is squaring one thing, it's usually making either a sextile or a trine to something else. And that brings some healing. That good aspect acts as a lifeline, which gets him out of trouble. And so even though there will probably be dissatisfaction with what he is doing, disapproval from the American public, even though his status will take a hit, he will probably survive and continue on and experience some personal healing at the same time. Now, transiting Neptune is making a quincunx to his natal ascendant, and transiting Saturn is making a quincunx to his natal Mars. We are seeing Trump perhaps being more rambling, more confused in his speech and his actions, and more delusional. We are also seeing him being more militaristic and wanting to use the National Guard and probably the Marines along with ICE to control things in this country. I heard the other day that soon, if we're not there already, the number of people in ICE will exceed the number of people employed by the FBI. And Trump seems to be using ICE as his own paramilitary group to execute a reign of terror upon many of the people in this country. So that is what I see in the stars, and that is what I see on the ground. Trump appearing very confused, very delusional, but doing what he can to use militaristic means to control people. At the time of the full moon on October 6th, transiting lunar nodal axis is still squaring his natal Uranus. Transiting Chiron is still squaring his natal Venus. It's moving away from that trine with natal Mars, so he will be more at risk for wounding without healing, perhaps, at this point. Transiting Sun and Moon are both conjunct and opposite his natal Chiron. And remember, his natal Chiron is conjunct natal Saturn in the USA chart. And that holds for any chart done in July of 1776, whether it's on the 2nd or the 4th. So Trump's fate and the nation's fate are very tied together at this particular moment. This could trigger some wounding for Trump and some wounding for the nation. And transiting Mars is going to be square his natal Pluto pretty strongly. So he will probably be very angry at this point, very inclined to use military force, either at home or abroad. So this could be a dangerous time for Trump and dangerous time for the nation. But even though he's not getting the lifeline from transiting Chirons, making a trine to natal Mars so strongly as he did before, transiting Jupiter is going to be strongly conjunct his natal Saturn. His natal Saturn is conjunct his natal Venus, so this will help boost his popularity somewhat. This will be a mitigating factor. And it will expand his control over things, for good or for ill. So again, we see a lot of trouble for Trump, but he does get this one lifeline at the same time. Now, on October 21st, 2025, that is the time of the new moon. We still have transiting lunar nodal axis square natal Uranus and transiting Chiron square natal Venus. That is pretty constant throughout this month. He's feeling very hyper, acting very chaotically, and his status is being wounded. But as before, there will be some mitigating factors, some lifelines out there. Before I mention those, he also has transiting Uranus square his natal ascendant, and that will exacerbate the chaos that he is creating. This will exacerbate his tendency to flip-flop, to say one thing one day and do the opposite the next day. However, transiting Jupiter is going to be making a sextile to his natal midheaven, and transiting Saturn is going to be making a trine to his natal Venus, and transiting Jupiter is going to be conjunct natal Saturn and Venus. So despite the difficulties of these squares, he is having multiple lifelines thrown his way at this point in time. So he's probably going to get some relief from all of these troubles. And since he is in charge of the executive branch, maybe that relief will come in the form of some sort of resolution to the government shutdown occurring around this point in time. And when that happens, that may boost his status among the people. Okay. Now, if we look at these graphs for the month, we see transiting Chiron square his natal Venus throughout the first half of the month and into the first week of the second half. Transiting lunar nodal axis square his natal Uranus the entire month, and it will be exact on October 20th. But Jupiter conjunct his natal Saturn, which will act as a lifeline, That is going to be present throughout most of this lunar month, and it will be exact on October 13th. Transing Uranus square his ascendant. That starts to go into effect as we approach mid-October, and it gains in strength throughout. But we also see that as transiting Chiron square Venus fades, transiting Chiron square Saturn takes over, begins to gain in strength. So again, some wounding to his control and his status could continue. And let me go back a second here. Notice that Trump has Capricorn on the cusp of the sixth house. That is ruled by Saturn, and the sixth house has to do with health. So as we get into the second half of this month, we will be seeing more and more a risk of some sort of wounding to Trump's health. At the very end, we have Jupiter getting within orb of this conjunction with Venus. And that is another sign that the government shutdown may end at this point, resulting in a boost to Trump's approval ratings. And consequently, things will be looking a little better for Trump by the end of the month. Now, if we look at trines and sextiles, Jupiter sextile the midheaven, that starts to go into effect during the second week of October, and it's exact on the 20th. This could bring about an end to the government shutdown sooner rather than later. And Saturn will be making a trine to his Venus in the second half of October, and it gets stronger and stronger. So again, things look a little worse for Trump in the first half of October, probably, and a little better in the second half. If we go back to those squares, they're going to be stronger in the first half, and then they ease up. Some relief comes in the second half of the month. If we look at adjustments, Trump has several quincunxes going on this month. The lunar nodal axis, quincunx his natal Jupiter, pretty strong. Neptune, quincunx his ascendant, pretty strong. Saturn, quincunx Mars, pretty strong. We've talked about these last two and the confusion and his adjustments he's making to the military, his use of the military, changing things from Department of Defense to Department of War, for example. That is all going to be pretty strong throughout the entire month. Chiron making a semisextile to his midheaven. That might result in some wounding to his status or adjustments that have to be made, but we have other indicators that can be mitigating factors and lessen the amount of wounding that occurs. Now, transiting Saturn quincunx natal Mars, that has occurred before this year, specifically on April 20th, and these are the headlines. Countdown to April 20th, Trump's border decision looms. Trump was expected to receive a report from the Secretaries of Defense and Homeland Security regarding conditions at the southern border. This report could trigger the use of the Insurrection Act of 1807, granting him authority to deploy military forces domestically. Well, whether the act was invoked or not, he has employed both the National Guard and the Marines domestically. And he is in the process of doing it even more so right now. Another headline, embassies meet the press. Deportation clash with courts. A federal judge threatened to hold the Trump administration in criminal contempt for defying court orders related to mass deportations. The Supreme Court temporarily blocked deportations under an 18th century wartime law, citing due process violations. So, throughout this year, we have seen the Supreme Court pretty much give Trump everything he wants. And these deportations are being continued right now. Speculation over martial law. Some outlets explored whether Trump might declare martial law, citing his January 20th executive order and the 90-day deadline that landed on April 20th. Critics warned of expanded military powers and suppression of dissent, especially in light of controversial deportations and executive orders. These stories reflect a tense moment in Trump's second term where constitutional boundaries, immigration policy, and civil liberties collided. We haven't seen a declaration of martial law, but nonetheless, we have seen Trump use a lot of force and military force in our cities. This includes both ICE, National Guard, and the Marines. And he is expanding that right now as this April 20th aspect of Transit Saturn Quincunx natal Mars is repeated. Okay. Looking at the sesquiquadrats to Trump's chart this month, he has Uranus making a sesquiquadrate to Chiron. That becomes stronger in the second half of the month. This could represent some sudden wounding to Trump or Trump erratically wounding others. Since there are some health concerns involved in Trump's chart, this could manifest as wounding in some way. Right at the very end of the month, we see Saturn making a sesquiquadrate to Pluto. This could represent either Trump using his power to control others more, or it could represent the people in the country fighting back, demanding certain changes, in which case the courts or the country control Trump and his power. Either of those things could happen, or both things could happen simultaneously. We'll just have to wait and see, but that's another thing to watch out for toward the end of the month. And I pointed out that in terms of the semi-squares and sesquiquadrats, Saturn, Chiron, and Uranus were very prominent this month in the USA chart. They're prominent in Trump's chart with respect to these particular aspects. So Trump and the fate of America seem to be very much tied together. Okay, that is going to be it for this slideshow. So I've stopped sharing. Should be an interesting month for both America and Trump. I'm expecting economic wounding and turmoil, suffering among people, a lot of militaristic things from Trump, both hits to his approval ratings, but also lifelines that kick in and save him. In terms of the government shutdown, a resolution looks more likely in the second half of this month or toward the end of this month, but people have free will, and a resolution could come sooner, or it could come later than expected. Either way, I would say brace yourself for wounding and for adjustments, and for some chaotic actions, delusional actions in speech, and some military militaristic actions on the part of Trump. That is what the weather forecast looks like. But as to what happens in reality, as I keep saying over and over, it depends on free will also and the decisions people make in response to the astrological influences. So we'll just have to wait and see. You've got the forecast. Now let's see what happens. Okay, well, that's it for today. So I'll just say so long and be well.